So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Birthplace of Country Music Museum and for our night with DonnaMarie Emmert, doing spooky stories and talking about being a storyteller. It's going to be a great evening and perfect to get us ready for Halloween at the end of this month. Yes. And several of you I have been very pleased to see are dressed for the occasion. So that's been really exciting. I'm Renee Rogers. I'm the head curator here at the Birthplace of Country Music Museum. And every month we do a speaker series, and October is the time for us to do storytelling. And we're really looking forward to an evening of spooky stories and terrifying tales. But first, I just want to give you a little bit of information. For our virtual audience, because we do have several people signed up on Zoom who are watching us up there on the camera, please be sure to turn your microphones off and also your video. And that just means that it's a lot easier for people to see the main event than accidentally get caught into someone else's loop by accident. So please do that. Get spookily caught up in someone else's loop. Yeah. We will have question and quick Q&A at the end. So if you have any questions for DonnaMarie, be sure and hold on to them because we'll be asking you to share them with her. And that goes for the people on Zoom also. If you have any questions, just type them into the chat and Scotty will facilitate those also. For our in-person audience, if you don't know already, restrooms are down this hall to the left. So if you do need to leave for that, that's where you need to go. And if you do need to leave before the end of the program, if you can exit out the doors that are right outside this doorway, straight onto Moore Street instead of going out the front, because those doors will be locked in about 10 minutes. And we'll be here all alone in this spooky old historic building. So those are just a few things to know before we move into our introduction with DonnaMarie. And then I'll hand the evening over to you. So DonnaMarie has been sharing Abingdon, Virginia's secrets, legends, and ghostly tales for over 25 years. Having a master's degree in storytelling, an outrageous love for all things Halloweeny and that go bump in the night, and a ferocious attraction to history, she combines these skills into memorable entertainment. And that is surely what we will be getting tonight. We're going to talk to her a little bit about being a storyteller, interspersed with some really great ghost stories in between. So I will hand it over for DonnaMarie to say hello, and then we'll get started. She was also a teacher, so she got you all doing exactly what she wanted you to do very quickly. Yes. Yay, teachers.
I am on.
Oh, you're on.
There we go. Amplified. All righty.
So, DonnaMarie, we are going to jump straight in if you're ready.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. So, my first question, before we jump into a story,
okay,
because I get scared really easily. I want to sort of ease us in.
Okay.
First off, I just want you to tell us a little bit about how you became a storyteller. I mean, is it something that happened in your family that you were used to hearing stories when you were a child and that made you want to, or was it something that came to you just because it was inside you?
Well, I have a story about that.
Awesome.
Yes. How many of you grew up with a storyteller in the family? Oh, you're so lucky. You are so lucky. As Renee told you earlier, I got my degree at ETSU in storytelling. Did you know you can get a degree in that? You can. And it's not easy either. You work a lot. So, of course, you take storytelling classes and you do all sorts of things. And, we had this big kind of a round robin and everybody was telling where they learned their stories from. And everybody said, oh, I learned these stories from my Nana, or these stories came from my family from over in Europe. And I'm just sitting there thinking, I don't have anything like that. And I was thinking, well, what were the earliest stories I remembered my family? And the best I could come up with was Three Little Bears. It was very disappointing. I also found out as I was going along in my training, there was a definite pattern showing. Most of the folks that I was training with told nice stories. They told heartwarming stories, those stories that bring a tear to your eye. Me, I'd make you cry, all right. I like those spooky stories. I like those good old scary stories. So it kind of broke down that anybody who called me for storytelling for something like a children's birthday party, you don't want me. But I will give you the phone number of somebody who can, who would be quite adequate. On the other hand, those folks would turn around and say, "Now, we don't do scary stories, but we have someone who does." And those were the stories that came to me. So it worked out pretty well. But in the meantime, I'm still thinking, who was the storyteller in my family? Because surely somebody was. And I kept thinking, what was the very first story I ever remember being told in my family? And one day it hit me. When I was but a wee little girl, my mom would pile me up in the car and we would drive off to what's known today as Brumley Gap. Back then, we just called it Poor Valley. Okay. And we'd drive over those roads and in. And my great grandmother lived in the first shack on the left. And every Sunday, all the women in the family would gather up at my great grandmother's house. She didn't have a telephone. So all the women would gather up and we would all spread news. Some of you may call it gossip. Well, I was just a little girl and I really didn't care about all this grown-up talk. And I would sit on the floor and play with whatever. And I remember my great-grandmother telling a story. And it's the first time I really paid attention. And the story goes like this. Long. When I was just a little old slip of a girl, there was a man who lived over here in the valley, and he had the worst luck with wives. He kept marrying them, and they kept dying on him. He was on wife number 5 when she upped and died, real mysterious like. Well, now, back in those days, when somebody died, the family would come in and prepare the body. They would come in and wash the body and comb the hair, and you'd get dressed in your best suit of clothes because you only had 2 sets of clothes back when I was a girl. You had your everyday clothes, and then you had your good clothes. Those were the ones you wore to church or the ones you got married in. They were either for burying or marrying. And the family would come in and do these things. And then the body was stretched out on a plank and sometimes just across the feeding table. And the family would sit up with the body all night long and lift a window, no matter what the weather, to make sure the soul got out. Well, that's what we used to do. But this man was going to do something completely different. He was going to bury his wife the very next day. Well, bad news travels fast. And that next morning, people just weren't saying much. And about like an unspoken bell had rung, the men and the boys stopped their chores and they pulled on their jackets and they took that little path that went up over the mountain and then dropped down over into Moccasin Gap, where the Primitive Baptist Church was. And then just a little while later, the women in the house and the girls, and they gathered up all their children and got everybody quiet and, got a jacket on them. And they too got on that path. And as I said, nobody was saying much of anything. And we all went up that path and dropped over that mountain and got to the church. Well, now, when I got there, it was as packed as you can imagine. And you see, and it was getting toward May. And it was kind of, there were so many bodies in there. And even with all the windows open, the men were standing against the walls and they were beaten up. And the women were sitting on the pews and the children were squirming and then they were trying to get them quiet. And me, as I said, I was just a little old slip of a girl. I could just stand at the back of the church and I could see everything that was going on. And up front, that preacher was just preaching away. And right in front of him was that widow man. And then there was that coffin with his wife in it. And I watched. And as that preacher was preaching away, I watched that husband reach into his pocket and pull out a handkerchief and dab the sweat off of his forehead. And then he looked over in that box, and with that same handkerchief, he dabbed the sweat off his wife's forehead. And I've always wondered, do dead people sweat? I hope they do, because they buried that woman that day. Now, that's the very first story I remember hearing as a child. And people wonder why I'm a little macabre.
That's a good one.
It kept me up at night.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like what I guess that's why the Victorians, they used to put those bells that attached down to the coffin in case you did get buried alive. You could call someone for help.
Mm-hmm. It didn't work.
I'm sure he didn't want that to happen.
No.
From what you've said.
For wife number 6 coming along.
Yeah. So the other thing that we mentioned when we introduced you, DonnaMarie, was that you are the Haint Mistress.
Yes, ma'am.
Of Abingdon. So how did you get that name? And, what prompted you to start doing these walking tours and becoming the Haint Mistress, the expert on all things spooky in Abingdon?
You can say that again. I love that. First of all, I got to ask, how many of you know what a haint is? Oh, mercy, there's not enough hands going up. You all don't know what a haint is? Well, bless your hearts. Yes. Now, all right, a haint is a kind of a ghost. Now, if you got ghosts at your house, it's not a big deal because they're fine. But if you got a haint, you got a problem, because a haint is a ghost with a very bad attitude. So how I became the Haint Mistress is I was named that by our old newspaper in Abingdon called Abingdon, Virginian. And it was my friend and editor, Rob Weisfeld, who named me that. And I am forever grateful to Abingdon, Virginian, and Rob for giving me that fabulous title. What can I say?
Does it mean that you can wrangle haints, though?
No, I run. That's one thing when I do tours. I do walking tours in Abingdon, and people come up to me and say, "Oh, can we go look for ghosts?" And I'm like, "Sure you can. I'm going home." I do not go look for ghosts. Things have happened on my tours before, and people's pulling my sleeve. And I'm like, "Did you see that?" No, I did not. I am a storyteller, and that's all.
And am I right that Robert Weisfeld, he had the Star Museum?
The Star Museum, yes.
Because I went to a ghost hunting session at the Star Museum.
Ooh.
And it scared the pants off me. It was very scary.
Yeah.
It really scared me.
That building is really haunted.
Yeah, I know. I did not like it.
Yeah.
I thought that was the same person. I was like, ooh.
Yeah, that was it.
So because of the walking tours that you do, are they all spooky based, or do you do ones that have other themes?
I have done history tours, straight up history tours, because people seem to like that, and I appreciate that. And I also do a really good cemetery tour. Yeah, those are good. Cemeteries, I know people are so scared about cemeteries, and they ought not be. They really shouldn't. It's not the people in cemeteries you need to worry about. And plus, I'm hoping you all are familiar with Abingdon. Have you been to Sinking Springs Cemetery? Oh, you need to go visit. It's wonderful. It is the oldest cemetery in Abingdon. It was the original site for Sinking Springs Presbyterian Church, and it's celebrating its 250th anniversary this year. And the names in that cemetery on those tombstones are the names on our streets. So it's Abingdon history that's in there. It's a pretty remarkable cemetery. You can't go at night. Did you know it's illegal to be in a cemetery at night in Virginia? It is. I just about found out the hard way, but that's another story. Anyway.
So we talked about the Star Museum and that you said it was pretty haunted.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to know is, what's the most haunted site in Abingdon? And can you tell me some of its stories?
It's always a toss-up for me. But I think the most haunted building in Abingdon is actually the tavern. I think per square foot, the tavern has more ghosts in it than even the Martha Washington Hotel. And the tavern has quite a few stories. Would you like to hear some of them? You would? Do you want to hear some ghost stories? Oh, that was a serious face. Well, I talk about the tavern every year because you have to. The tavern was established in 1779. And I want you to think about the logistics of the town of Abingdon. I mean, we're very sweet and we sit there right next to Interstate 81. But how did that town end up in that section of Virginia that far back? I mean, you think about it, for a town to be down here at that time in the 1700s is pretty amazing. Well, the main reason is that the main street, which a lot of people still call Lee Highway, was actually at one time the Great Road. And the Great Road was the superhighway in the 18th century that led from up north all the way down south. Or if you were going out to Cumberland Gap, you would take the Great Road, and then you would just hang a right to get through the Cumberland Gap to get to the wilds of the wild, wild west of Kentucky. So Abingdon happened because of the Great Road. It also happened because of that itty bitty, teeny tiny little place just about 15 miles up the road called Saltville. I'm hoping you all have been to Saltville before. It is maybe that big. And I used to make horrible fun of Saltville because it was so little. It was littler than Abingdon. But as it turned out, I have found that if it was not for the town of Saltville, Abingdon would not exist in the manner that it does, because Saltville actually put cash money into town. But I'm getting into history, so sorry. You want ghost stories. She said, finally. Well, as I said, the tavern sits as it does right on Main Street. And if you ever look at that old sign, there's an icon on it that shows a stagecoach. The tavern was a stagecoach stop. Today, to drive from modern Abingdon to modern Chilhowie takes 20 minutes. Or as some folks on my tour said, I can drive it in 15. I can't imagine. It used to be a full day's ride on a very bad road in a carriage. So, did people overnight at the tavern? Well, of course they did. Did folks die at the tavern? Yes, they did. Were people murdered at the tavern? They were. And I'm sure there was a young electrician who wished he had known this a little over 25 years ago. You see, when you go into the tavern, you can go up the two little flights of stairs and go into the attic. And there in the original plaster of that building, all along the walls are very heavily penciled in numbers. Well, I know there's a local story that's going around now that the tavern was used during the Civil War as a field hospital. I don't think that's true. But as I said, it was a stagecoach stop. So each one of those numbers did correspond with a cot. Well, the young electrician came in. It was a Friday afternoon, about 4:00. He pulled up, and this was going to be his last ticket for the day. And his hope was that he was going to be able to get up there, get whatever was wrong fixed, and get out of there. And he was going to get to start his weekend early. Yeah. In the door he went, up the two flights of stairs, into that attic, and to the left. And all along the left wall, there's this big conduit that runs along it. And all the modern stuff, the pipes and wires and stuff. Well, he went over to it, and he opened up the access panel. He's got out his mag light. He's checking everything out. And he sees it's going to be an easy fix. He's focused on his job. He's got his toolkit in front of him. He's getting his tools out. He's focused on his job. When suddenly, something catches him out of the corner of his eye. And when he looks up on the wall, one of those numbers has turned blood red and is beginning to ooze down the wall. He very quickly packed up his tools, came down those 2 flights of stairs out to his van, and he would not go back in that building. I can't say as I blame him. Now, that's just one of the stories of the tavern. There are more. Now, we were discussing earlier about what a haint is. I'm not absolutely sure, but according to me, if there is a haint on my tour, she is inside the tavern. It was said that she was a young professional woman who used to tend bar there. And she would negotiate prices downstairs and then would go up to her room with her business client to finish negotiating. So everything was going quite well one day until the men who were playing cards downstairs at the bar heard a shriek. They pounded up the stairs, they kicked open the door, and they saw lying in the middle of the floor that young woman in an ever-expanding pool of blood. Her throat had been slit. And the last word she was able to mouth was the name of the man who had followed her up the stairs. Well, now everybody had seen him go up after her, but nobody had seen him come down. They searched the building, they searched the grounds. They never found this man. Well, now he may have disappeared, but she has not. What her name is, as I said before, I do not know. But for over 25 years, I have called her the Tavern Tart. And several psychics over the years have informed me that she does not appreciate me calling her that. So I no longer stand in front of the tavern and tell my stories. I'm across the street. It just seems the wisest thing to do.
I was about to say you shouldn't make ghosts mad, I don't think.
No, not her. Not her. No.
And I've heard other people say that they've seen or heard things at the tavern. So yeah. I don't think I'd want to be there late at night by myself.
Well, I will say this. A story as I had heard it. Some years ago, I was approached by a couple of young men who wanted to talk about ghosts. And I always think that's a great conversation. So I was like, yeah, let's do this thing. And I met with them and, we had a grand old time. And I have never heard such flattery in my life. You are fantastic. I'm like, well, yeah, kind of. You tell the best stories. I'm like, only one who does it. What can I say? And it kept getting deeper and deeper. And I finally said, okay, please tell me just what do you want? Well, I was informed that they wanted me to help them get their ghost business started in Abingdon. And I said, now, why would I do that? That's what I do. Well, then they got a little snippy with me and said, well, you just tell stories. We actually find the ghosts. Really? I said, how do you do that? We went to school. Well, I went to school. I never saw that on a schedule anywhere. And they proceeded to tell me all the things that went on with it. And the first thing, let me tell you this, the first thing you do when you're becoming, you're becoming a ghostbuster, if you will. First place you do is you find a place that's haunted. That would be Ghost 101. And then you ask permission of the property owner. That's just smart. I said, okay. I said, then what do you do? And they said, well, then we say a prayer. I'm like, well, good luck with that. All right. I said, and then they said, well, then we take our readings. And then they went on and, described all the different things. I'm like, okay. I said, all right. Then what do you do? And they said, well, then we leave. I said, wait. What you're telling me is you're able to essentially bring these things out of the box, take their picture, but you don't put them back in the box? I said, is that not a problem? No, they assured me, no, that wasn't a problem at all. Well, it may never have been a problem before, but I can tell you at the tavern it was. Max Herman owned the tavern at the time, and he was extremely generous and let this group come in, and they spent 2 nights there. Furthermore, I'll be the first to admit it. They got the goods. I mean, it was the time to video. It was about the right time. Did you know that the ghost hour is actually 4 a.m.? It's about 4 o'clock in the morning. Nothing good happens at 4 a.m. Okay. Furniture was moving. It was the voices. It was the deal. However, when they left that building, the tavern continued to rock and roll. Napkins were floating through the air by themselves. Glasses were crashing off of shelves with no apparent help. And I think what finally did it was one of the servers there got smacked in the back of the head with a basket of bread that shot off a shelf. And at that point, everyone who worked at the tavern got together en masse, went to Max, and they said, if you ever let that group come back in here, we are all going to quit. So that group got banned from that building. So I can't vouch for this firsthand, but this is what I was told. And as a storyteller, I feel it's just my duty to share it with all of you.
So with the tavern stories, you've touched on history, and I know that's a really big part of the stories that you tell. They're based in places and events and people.
Right.
So tell us, and you've told us a good story about history, but I know you mentioned the Martha Washington Inn.
Yeah.
And I know that there are some really good stories there. I remember I had my prom there back in high school.
Oh,
and
did you?
We had some spooky stories that were told to us before we came in there. So, and that's a really interesting historic building. So can you tell us some of the history and then some of the stories that are tied to it?
Yes, I can. I hate to say this, but when it comes to the real stories about the Martha Washington, what happened inside the building, I don't know those stories because the keeper of the tales was a gentleman by the name of Pete Sheffey. And he learned them from his dad, who learned them from his dad. There were 3 generations of Sheffys who told those stories. And when Pete passed, those stories are gone. I think his daughter Rachel knows them, I hope. So I don't actually know the stories about the inside of the Martha. However, on the outside, I got a story or two. Now, you all are familiar with the Martha Washington. Beautiful building. That big center section, when it was originally built, that was the home. It was called Preston Hall. And it had something like a 50-acre yard to go with it. Can you imagine mowing that? That's a lot of goats, folks. Well, the Prestons didn't get to live there very long. It was General Francis Preston who had the place built. He was kind of an Abingdon bigwig. If you ever try to study the Preston family in Virginia history, good luck. It's a long one and it's interwoven. Let's just say that. However, it was his wife that you really want to know more about because, ladies, it was Sarah Buchanan Campbell Preston's money that built Preston Hall. Yay, Sarah. When that house was finished, it was $5 short of costing. Are you ready for this? $15,000. And that's some big money back in 1832, don't you know? It really and truly was. As I said, the Prestons really didn't get to live there very long. General Preston only lived there about 4 years before he died. He was considerably older than his wife. He was 28 when he married. She had just turned 15 when she married. Can you imagine being 15 years old and getting married? No. It must have worked out because they ended up having at least a dozen children. Yeah, imagine. Well, the stories about the Martha. As I said, I don't know the inside stories, but I do know a pretty good outside story. Some years ago, I went out to my mailbox to get my paper, and there was my neighbor Mike across the fence. And whenever Mike was across the fence, I knew he had a story for me. because he had a ghost in his house and she was miserable. There was this one room she always destroyed. So I was like, oh, good. Mike's got a story for me. So I go over and we're chatting. He said, if you've got some time today, he said, come down to work. He said, there's going to be a woman there. You're going to want to see what she's got. Oh, this is odd. He worked at a local print shop and I had the time. So I ended up going down to where he worked. And sure enough, when I walked through the front door, there was this lady standing at the front counter and there were all these papers spread out. And I walked up to her. I said, wow. I said, what you got here? And she flung her arms out. She said, nothing. And I thought, well, two can play this silly game. So I just walked around the counter and I started looking. She had been to a local private auction and she had bought some amazing pieces of Abingdon memorabilia. Oh, it was good stuff. Original deeds, the ones written on sheepskin. Oh, original postcards, penny postcards printed on linen. Love those. And she had all of these pictures. And there was this one picture. It wasn't an 8x10. It was an odd shot. It was more like maybe an 8x12, 8x14. And it was done in those pretty sepia tones, that really nice, cafe au lait colors. And it was the front of the Martha Washington back when it was a girls' college. And it was it was a beautiful picture. And there was snow. You could tell it would have come up to your knees. And the little trees there they were bent down. Their little limbs were all full of snow. And I was looking at this picture. And about that time, the back door swung open and out came Mike. Remember Mike? He came out. He said, you're looking at that picture. I figured you would. Have you seen him yet? And I said, seen who yet? He said, who's in the picture? Have you seen him yet? And I said, Mike, I don't know what you're talking about. I just see an old building with a bunch of snow. He said, oh, okay. He said, down at the entrance. He said, down there, just keep your eyes on that area. He said, don't stare at it. Let it just kind of come to you. And I thought, those are very peculiar directions. But okay. So I'm looking at this picture, not staring at it, but just letting it kind of come to me. And I swear to you, the most peculiar thing happened. As I'm looking at the entrance of the drive on that snowy scene, these two figures just seemed to lift up out of this picture. And they got more and more distinct until I realized I was looking at two Confederate soldiers. They both had on those old Johnny Reb slouch hats. They both had on those tight-fitting military jackets. They both had on munition belts. They were both right-handed because they were carrying their rifles. But that's about all the directions or all the things, the details that I got, because from the waist down, there was nothing. And at this point, I'm staring at this picture. And I'm trying to pull a MacGyver on this, for those of you who remember that reference. How did they do this? I'm looking for, clues. There are no footprints in the snow. And then I'm looking at them again, and then I realize I can see through them. I can see the fence behind them and the snow and the shrubbery. And I thought to myself, wow, this is cool. I thought, this is a really nice piece of trick photography. This is great. And then I looked in the corner, and there was the photographer's name. He was G.N. Wirtz. He was Abingdon's first photographer. But underneath his name was a date. It was about 1910. So what I saw was not a piece of trick photography. It was not double exposed. It wasn't photoshopped. What was in that picture was in that picture. So I always tell folks, as you're walking down the streets of Abingdon, be careful, because you just never know who you might bump into.
That would really scare me. I'm not sure I could have handled that.
It was pretty amazing.
Yeah.
It was pretty amazing.
Well, and I think a lot of people, when they talk about ghosts, they talk about those kind of moments where you see something either out of the corner of your eye or you see something in a picture that you didn't notice before, even if a picture you've known for years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that's a good way to really get scared.
And just for any of you who are thinking this, no, I do not have that picture. I don't know. She wouldn't give me a copy of it. Oh, I was so nice. I begged. I was like, please, oh, please, oh, please. And she was like, well, I'll think about it. She didn't. So I don't know what happened to it, but it's out there.
So it's one thing to know these stories, DonnaMarie, but it's another thing to be able to tell them and to tell them well, which you are very good at.
Well, thank you.
So what do you do to develop your stories? And I guess what I'm asking is like, how do you start from like a historic fact or a story that you've heard and turn it into something that has everyone at the edge of their seat?
Well, thank you. I'm not a historian. A lot of folks in town think I am. I'm not. I'm a gossip. I'm simply nosy. And that's how I approach history. I mean, you can tell me this, young lady, when you were learning history in school, what do they teach you about history? Okay. You get a bunch of names and a bunch of dates. Do you get anything else? Everybody in here can answer that. She said, no, not really. I don't like and I understand how history is taught in schools. I get that. But the way to truly teach history is to turn it into gossip. Because that's all it is. I mean, we have these high, okay, I can feel a soapbox getting under my feet. We have these high ideals about, our histories and how these things happen, which is great and it's good. But I want to know about the people. I want to know what they ate and what they did or didn't do. I want to know about them. And it's one thing, you've probably known people like this. They can stand in front of someplace and say, oh, yeah, that place is haunted. It's got a ghost upstairs that bangs the windows. Well, I'm sorry. That's not much of a ghost story now, is it? You need to know, well, who is that ghost? Who lived in that house that would make them stick around after the fact and bang those windows? I can about tell you that person is not going to be happy. I can just about assure you there's going to be a story. And that's how I approach both the history and the stories of my town. When I give a tour, most folks are, and I love this, mainly it's local people who come out. Bless you all. And folks come back, which I think is just silly, but they come back because they're learning the history of the town. They're like, oh, yeah, I've forgotten parts of that story. I've got to remember that because I want to tell my friends. I can't tell you how happy that makes me. Because when I am dead and gone from this planet, my stories will be gone too, unless they are planted in the minds of the people in my audience. And those people go and share them. That's what keeps our town alive. That's what keeps our history alive. It makes you appreciate it. You don't have to be a historian. You just have to be nosy. That's how I approach it.
That's a good way, I think. And
I like it.
And it leads me to my next question about the storytelling side of it, which is it's not just about telling the story. It's also about creating an atmosphere. And what kind of techniques, what are you doing to create atmosphere so that you're drawing people in?
I have absolutely no idea. I really don't. I will tell you this. All right, let me ask you this, and I want you all to be truthful. You can close your eyes if you want to, but I need a show of hands. How many in here believe in ghosts? Oh, I see some doubters. But I can tell you right now, I do believe in ghosts. I do. I've seen things. I've seen weird things. And if you believe in ghosts, I bet you guys have seen something weird too. So there is a big difference when somebody's just standing there telling you a story and you can tell they don't believe. But when somebody is standing there and they are telling you their truth, I don't care whether you believe or not. When you see that person who was totally invested in that story, you're going to believe them. And that's how I approach it. I do believe in what I'm talking about. And it's the ghost stories that led me into the history. So that's how I approach it.
That makes sense. And so let's go to a story then. Tell me, or tell us, not just me. Everyone else can listen. Yeah. Tell us the scariest story you've heard or told.
It's one I personally experienced. And all the stories I tell on my tour anymore are stories that have been shared with me. But this story I can vouch for 100% because it happened to me. And it goes like this. The year was 1970, and I got a phone call from Barter Theater. I was so excited. We need a sound technician. Can you run sound? Oh, you betcha I can run sound. Boy, I could lie really well. I was in the theater department at Virginia Highlands Community College, and to get this phone call from Barter Theater, oh yeah, I'd have said anything to get in there. Well, they hired me, silly people. And I went in, and they very quickly realized I didn't know bupkis about running sound. And this was back in the day that when a show closed, everybody rotated out and a whole new crew and cast generally would come in for the next show. For any of you who went to see Dames at Sea that season, my total apologies. I was really horrible. I could never, ever, ever get my sound cues right. Those people hated me. They did, and I don't blame them at all. But I kept trying because, by golly, I was working at Barter Theater. Woo! Well, one day I came into work and I went to my a stage manager. Her name was Champ Leary. I'll never forget poor, long-suffering Champ. And I went up to her and I said, Champ, big eyes and shiny, how about this? When the play's over tonight, how about if I stay and practice? She said, oh, my God, that's wonderful. Stay as long as you need to. But I'm going to tell you this. You're going to be in here by yourself. Okay. Nobody else is going to be in here with you. All right. She said, everyone's going to be gone. I said, oh, okay. Still, the clues fly and I don't catch one of them. So at that time, the sound booth and the light booth were upstairs in that room that's behind the balcony. And we could see out, but the audience couldn't see in. So most of our cues were visual cues, or Champ Leary screaming in my ear going, for God's sakes, could you get that right? No. Anyway, well, when the show was over and I'd ruined yet another production of Dames at Sea, everyone left. And I was in the theater quite by myself. Well, Champ had given me my instructions. Stay, practice. When you are done, you come out of the light booth. You just turn the light off, come out, pull the door shut. It's a self-locker. It's a no-brainer. Down the stairs you come. You're not going to be able to get out through the front doors because they're going to be chained shut. You have to go into the theater. When you do, you walk down the aisle, get up on the stage, you put out the night light. Are any of you theater people? Any theater people? Then you will know this. There's such a thing in theater that's known as a ghost light. I can't make that up, okay? Our ghost light was a tall pole with a bulb with a little cage over it. Put out the ghost light. A ghost light is put out so that when somebody comes onto the stage, they're not in total darkness. Then you go down the stairs through the catacombs, which was our loving name for the dressing rooms. And yes, they were that creepy. Then out the door onto stage, onto Actors Alley. You got it? Yeah. So I stayed and I practiced. Guys, I was 20 years old. How long do you think I practiced? Oh, 15, 20 minutes tops, right? I had a pretty good sound system at my fingertips. My main objective, how loud will it go? Yeah. Oh, it went really loud. Oh, it was great. This was long before the remodel. And they used to have these great chandeliers in there that hung down like clusters of grapes. They were beautiful. It was old Edison lights. I made them shake. Yeah. Now, I did that for 45 minutes. It was great. Well, I'd done a little bit of practice and I was like, okay, feel a little better. Got up, remember my instructions, turn out the light in the booth. Now, remember, I could see down into the theater. And there was this real pale blue lighting there. It wasn't really creepy or weird or anything. It was just kind of an emergency grade lighting. But folks, when I came out of that light booth and I heard that door click shut, those little hairs started up the back of my neck. Now, if you've ever experienced that sensation, something's looking at you. I don't know what you all do when you're alone and you're afraid, but I know what I do. I give myself the big girl speech. Yes, indeed, I'm a big girl. I'm not afraid of anything. Now, remember, I'm alone. So I could do this because my thinking was this. I'm alone and there's nobody in there to hear me being really crazy. Okay, so it's all good. But if somebody is in there and they hear me doing this, they're going to know I'm crazy, and you don't mess with crazy people. So I'm swinging my arms and I'm trying to whistle because if you can whistle, you're really cool. But the only thing that was coming out was my mouth was so dry. I was terrified, but I kept it together. I came down those steps. And when I saw those front doors, I bolted for them. But guess what? They're chained shut. I'm not going out that way. If I could have gotten back into the light booth, I would have, but I couldn't. So into Barter Theater, I went stage left. And when I got into that theater, those little hairs went. I bet I look like an amorous cockatiel. And in my biggest big girl voice, I said, "Is there anybody in here?" And no one said a word. So I tiptoed down about three or four aisles, and I just happened to look up in the balcony, and that's where I saw him. He, and I use that pronoun very loosely, was clutched up in the corner like a big white spider. And he looked at me, and I looked at him, and that's when he flew down on me. And at that point, I was no longer a big, brave girl. No, I ran. Oh, I don't know how I cleared that stage, but I did. And the next thing I knew, I was plastered behind the proscenium of Barter Theater going, "Oh my God, what was that?" I mean, if you've experienced something like this, your head is really trying to make sense of it, and nothing makes sense. And back then, you didn't talk about ghosts because if you did, you were nuts. So I'm thinking to myself, "Oh my God, what was it?" And then I thought, "Oh, wait, I've got it. Okay. I really am horrible at my job, right?" Yeah, you didn't have to say that. But truth hurts. Yes, I was horrible at my job. I worked with professional people, okay? They hated me. It's adding up here. They had put together a practical joke because theater people are very clever. And I knew that if I could get out there with enough light, I was going to be able to see a string with a sheet attached to it that they had rigged up and therefore to scare me. Well, I didn't have any light. And then I saw in front of me my ghost light. I still can't believe I had the foresight to do this. I grabbed this light, I flicked it on, and Out onto Barter Stage, I leapt, and I took that ghost light out as far as it would go, that extension cord very straight and extended. And I poked that light up toward the balcony. And do I see a piece of fishing line? I do not. Do I see a sheet that's been dropped over the seats? I do not. I look down in the orchestra pit. Is there anything down there? There is not. I stood up, put the ghost light beside me. I looked out into the theater, and there he stood. It's about the second row. And he was as white could be, and he was not very happy. He had his arms crossed, and he looked at me as if to say, ha, 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 gotcha. Wrong. Woo, I was gone. I flew down those steps. How I did not fall, I will never know. I absolutely flung myself through the catacombs. I was beating feet out of that place until I hit the back door. And I mean, I hit the back door because, folks, I thought it was an Audi. And no, my friends, it was an innie. I hit it full tilt Wile E. Coyote and bounced off of it. Thank God I've always been a padded girl. I smacked my nose, my mouth, everything else. I finally got up, grabbed the doorknob, got out into the alley. I was in tears. I had hurt myself, and I thought about what was inside that theater, and I began to run. And at that time, I lived in an apartment up on Circle Drive, which is many blocks away. I ran nearly the entire way home. The next day, when I came to work, and I did not tell a soul what I had seen because they would think I was crazy. And I needed that job. So I kept my mouth shut. I kept my mouth shut for years and years. I moved away from Abingdon, was gone for a decade, and then I moved back. Well, don't you know, everybody who worked at Barter Theater talked about the ghosts of Barter Theater. Oh, yeah, there's lots of them in there. There's one that they call the Jerk. I think that was mine. He's known to torture technicians. Hello? Now, as I said, I don't know who mine was. I did not ask for identification. But I will tell you this. I know what I saw, and he was in there. So to this day, if you ever see me at Barter Theater, watch me, because when I go in, I'm really happy. Because, you know, it's good entertainment. That's some good stuff up there. But when that show is over, get out of my way. I will never be the last person inside that building again. You can take that to the bank. And that's my story about Abingdon.
I don't know what I would do in that situation. I would probably still be curled in a little ball somewhere.
It wasn't pleasant.
No.
It wasn't. It really wasn't.
So I remember when I was a kid, you know, because there's stories that you hear that are like that are personal stories. Mm-hmm. And then there's stories that you hear that are sort of the stories that do the rounds.
Right.
You know, like Bloody Mary in the mirror and those type of stories. Mm. And I remember hearing a story where at the end there was a pretty big twist. Do you have any of those? No stories with twist?
Oh, actually, yeah, I do. Yeah, I do.
Woohoo.
You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Okay. This is a true story. And this is the one I normally end my tour with. It is Abingdon's best known story, I think. And it goes something like this. I need to tell you a little background information. During the 1850s, Abingdon was an extremely prosperous town. We really were. According to the 1860 census, we had 100 water wheels in the county. I mean, you think about that. 50 of them were for grinding grain. The other 50 were for lumber mills. That's a lot of corn and trees. Okay. We had the train come through town. Ooh. If you've ever seen a Western in your life, you know what that means. Well, we were going really gangbusters. I had great industry there. And then that little event known as the Civil War broke out. Now, all across America, not just in Abingdon, but all across America, everyone said, this war is going to be over in 3 weeks. Then people said, this war is going to be over in 6 weeks. And we all see how that worked out. Now I bring us to the year of 1864. At this point, Abingdon is no longer prosperous. In fact, we're kind of pitiful. All of our able-bodied men have gotten up and gone off to fight for one side or the other, mostly for the Confederacy. That summer, there were 2 epidemics that swept through town. One was typhoid, which is a perfectly atrocious way to die. And the other, if I'm not mistaken, was yellow fever, which is also equally atrocious. And by the end of the summer, the very weak, the very old, and the very young were all dead. And just when you think it couldn't possibly get any worse in town, we get to December of 1864, when we have a Union troop movement of, I have read, of upwards of 10,000 men, Union soldiers, march through town. It was called Stoneman's Raid. Now, Stoneman's Raid had taken a page from the playbook that Sherman had written. In fact, as a little footnote, I read somewhere that on the eve of setting fire to Atlanta, Sherman sent a telegram to Abraham Lincoln saying, don't you think we need to be doing the same thing to Abingdon? Well, they ended up doing just that. Stoneman's Raid burned its way through Kingsport, burned its way through Goodson, which of course today is Bristol. But when they got to us, they were kinder. And I don't know why, actually. I have heard that a number of the officers with Stoneman had family in town and they didn't want to burn their families' homes down. I also read that when Stoneman's Raid was coming into town, they were met by a group of concerned citizens with a signed petition asking them to please stay. Because you see, as I said before, most of the men were gone, which meant we had no law. And there were bad things happening out in the county. There were arsons and robberies, a murder or two. Things were getting really close to town, and we were scared. And we would have preferred to have been occupied by the enemy force rather than deal with this on our own. But Stoneman's Raid said thanks, but no thanks, and they began to set fire to town. However, they burned down the train depot, but they did not burn down the homes across the track. They burned down a grocery store that was right across from there. They burned down a livery stable. The man was a known Confederate sympathizer, so they took his horses and they burned him out of business. They burned down the newspaper office. They burned down the jail, a series of buildings across the street that had been used for barracks, and then they left town. Well, now we had absolutely no idea what was going to happen. And that's the reason there were so many people out on the street that night, because you would have been a little anxious too. So despite the cold weather, despite the sleet, people were milling about on Main Street, and that's the reason there were so many witnesses to what did happen next. About midnight, one Union soldier rode back into town. He rode up to the front of the courthouse. He threw his reins down to a man who was standing there in the streets. He took the steps up to the courthouse. He kicked open the doors. And the next thing we knew, our courthouse was on fire. And then that man came out with a torch in his hand. And he zigzagged across Main Street for about a block. And he set fire to every business and every building. Then he walked back up Main Street, got on his horse, and held his rifle, daring anyone to come and try to put out any of those fires. Well, folks got close enough to him that they could see him in the firelight, and they recognized him. He was from Abingdon. His name was James Wyatt, and the last time he had been in the courthouse, things had not gone his way. This was a revenge fire, of which there were several during the Civil War. And all those businesses and all those buildings that he set fire to, those were owned by the man he'd been in the lawsuit with. James Wyatt's undoing was he sat and he watched. There was a group of Confederate soldiers on the next rise over. They saw the new flames in the Abingdon night sky and they rode into town. Now, if you had been standing out on the street that night further down, you'd have seen James Wyatt riding hellbent for leather right down the middle of Main Street with 4 men behind him shooting at him and the entire hillside ablaze. Well, none of those bullets hit him until he reined his horse to the left to make good his escape up Church Street. And when he did, one of those mini balls hit him square in the spine. And as the horse topped the hill, he came out of the saddle and the horse continued on. And it's that horse that continues on to this very day. Folks have said that when they've been sitting on the front porch of the Martha Washington in broad daylight, they've seen a horse just come out of nowhere. It dashes the drive in front of them and then disappears. Others have said that when they've been spending the night at the Martha, they've looked out the windows onto that meadow that's down next to the railroad track, and they can't for the life of them understand why there's a horse in its full gear standing down there feeding very peacefully. Well, if they ask me, I could tell them. It's the ghost horse of the Martha Washington or the ghost horse of Barter Green. It's all the same horse. And as I said, this is Abingdon's best known ghost story, and it is true. Now, I've told this story for as long as I've been telling stories out on the streets. And at least once a year, I would always have a child come up to me and say, I've seen that horse. And I'm like, I bet you have. And I'd go on my way. And one night I had a very serious young woman come up to me and she said, you know, that story's true, don't you? And I said, sweetheart, come on. It's a story. It's a good story, but it's just a story. She said, no, she said, you do not understand. She said, my husband is a police officer in this town, and he answered a 911 call from a very upset motorist on Main Street, Abingdon. Will someone please come catch this crazy horse that's running loose in front of the Martha Washington? And when he pulled up and got out of his squad car, guess what's standing in the middle of Main Street? A horse. They looked at each other. The horse turned, ran up on Barter Green, and disappeared. I can't argue with that. So I always tell folks, if you're walking down the streets late at night at Abingdon and you hear a clip-clop behind you, it is not going to be from a carriage ride.
So we have time for just one more short question and then maybe one more story.
Okay.
And the question first is, because we've got a lot of people here.
Yeah.
A lot of people like to hear scary stories.
We like to be scared. Seriously, there's something in people that we just kind of, we're in a safe environment, but our brains are funny little things, aren't they? And they just kind of like that feeling of being scared because it's being alive. That's how I think of it. You guys? Yeah, it's wonderful. We were talking earlier, I think, about scary movies. I don't go see scary movies. I don't like them. I don't. I have more than enough between my ears to keep me entertained. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, I'm the same way. My imagination's too big to look at those movies and not carry it with me.
Exactly.
Yeah. So finally, DonnaMarie, why don't you pick the story you want to tell us to end with? Instead of me prompting it with a question, just what story do you think we really need to hear tonight?
Ooh. There is a wonderful building on Main Street that locals know as the Greenway Trig. And it has recently been the home of Abingdon Olive Oil Company. So that kind of gives you a little sight there. And that was one of the very first stories I learned when I started doing my tours. And this story was given to me by a wonderful, wonderful old teacher of mine. And I made the mistake of going and researching it. And it turns out a lot of this story is just not true. That does not stop me from telling it. So the story, as I heard it originally, you can take with a grain of salt, but this is how it goes. Mistress Greenway and Trigg were business partners. It was said that they were architects. They both had gotten married. They were both starting families, and they both needed a home that was as good as their reputation. The only problem was their pockets weren't quite deep enough. However, if they pooled their resources, they could build quite the nice house. There was just one problem. Well, actually, two problems. The men, it was said, had married sisters. And I have been told on good authority, nothing can love like a sister or hate like a sister. And I don't know which one was true here. I've been told the two sisters just despised one another. Then I was told the two sisters actually adored one another, but they couldn't stand the other one's husband. However, it must have worked out because, number one, the house is still standing. To me, that house is the epitome of male ingenuity. And I will tell you why. If you were to drop a line straight down the middle of that house and push the halves apart, I dare you to find a difference between the two sides. What you are looking at essentially is a Victorian duplex. It had the same number of rooms, the same beautifully appointed fireplaces. What one side had, so did the other, separate and equal. These men were no dummies, okay? But I can tell you one thing that the Greenway side had that the Trigg side did not. The Greenway side has its own ghost. Now, upstairs are these, of course, two wonderful peak Victorian attics, and they'd been made into apartments. Can you imagine? In views for days. Well, there was a young man who lived on the Greenway side for years, and he was a pretty casual bachelor guy. He rarely shut the front door, let alone locked it, because his friends came in and out whenever. And, you know, he just figured he really didn't own anything worth stealing, so why bother? So it was not a big deal for him. One afternoon about 5 o'clock, when he was sitting on the couch watching the news, when a face appeared at his door. Well, Monday night, and it was football night. He was expecting friends to come over, and he said, "Hey, man, come on in. You're early, but, you know, sit down. We'll watch the news. It's all good." And he said the face disappeared. And then he heard someone running down the hallway and then down the stairs. Well, that caught his attention, and he ran out to the hallway, and he said when he looked down on the stairs, he said standing down there was an elderly Black woman. She had an old-fashioned dress, the one with the high neck and the long sleeves. She was wearing a white apron. She looked at him. He looked at her. And then she was gone. He said that's the first time he saw her, but it wasn't the last. He said it wasn't that you could mark a day on a calendar, but it seemed like about every 6 weeks she would show up. And he said, I was always nice to her because I just got the feeling she was there to look after me. She's been seen all over the Greenway side of the building, but never the Trigg. Well, now, some years ago, I gave a tour, and of course, October is a big month for me. And as it turned out, there was a woman in the audience, and I know several of you in here perform. And it's the most wonderful feeling in the world when you look out into an audience and you see that person who's just lit up because of you. And she was my person that night. She was, and I just kind of found myself going, da, 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 just for her because she was awesome. Well, when I was finished that night with the tour, I went up and I shook her hand and I said, thank you. I said, you made this really, really good tour for me. She said, I just love tours like this. I said, really? I said, how come? She said, well, I guess it's because I'm a psychic. Well, that was news to me. And I said, you are? She said, yeah. I said, okay, tell me about the buildings. Well, danged if she didn't. Now, at first, I was just really flattered because she essentially told me everything I had told them on the tour. And as an old school teacher, I was so happy. It's like, somebody listened. This is great. And then she started giving me details. And they were good. And I started making notes. And then it changed up again. And suddenly she started telling me things she should not have known. Because trust me, I don't tell everything I know on these tours. And she knew stuff she should not have. So when she was finished, I was a believer in her abilities. And what she told me about the Greenway side of the building is that, yes, indeed, there is a ghost in there. She was the former housekeeper. She came to work that morning. She'd been very sick and she wouldn't stay home because this was her house. This was her family that she took care of. And she sat down at the table in the kitchen just for a moment, just to catch her breath. And that's where she died. And what's truly sad, she doesn't know she's dead. She's still looking after that house, just the Greenway side. And furthermore, she can't quite figure out how she can look out the windows and see us, but we apparently can't see her. So it just goes to show that not every ghost story is a boo or is a funny. Some of them are actually very sad. So if you are on Main Street, Abingdon, and you pass the Greenway Trig building, just wave. It's got to help ease that a little bit. And that's my story.
So this has been awesome. And I'm sure there are some questions in the audience. And I will bring the microphone to you if you have something you want to ask DonnaMarie so that our Zoom audience can also hear you. Who would like to go first?
Craig.
I just want to know, where do we sign up for the tour?
Oh, thank you. I'll slip you that 5 in a minute. Abingdon Spirit Tours start this year. I can be booked anytime. But I start this weekend. So it's the 7th through the 10th. I don't know that I'll be out for Columbus Day or not. But the 13th through the 30th, I'm out every night. I do prefer, if you have reservations, it makes my job a little bit easier. You can go to my website, just simply go to Google and type in the Haint Mistress, Haint, not HATE. Okay. I'm not a Haint Mistress. I'm a Haint Mistress. You got to say it right. And then you can find me there. Thanks.
Who's next?
So I understand you do these ghost tours all through October. Why is it that you don't walk on Halloween?
That's a night for amateurs. No, there's other things to do on Halloween. I do not walk on Halloween. I don't.
You started in about Saltville a little bit. So my brother and I discussed this. It just has such a drawing. It's such an interesting place. So just for a hair bit more, could you elaborate just a little bit more on what you were going to say earlier? For just a couple more sentences on what you were speaking about. I was interested to hear you. Stop.
If I could split myself into different people and do different tours, my next tour would be one of Saltville. Saltville has an absolutely insane history. It is, if you haven't been to Saltville, You need to go to the museum that's there. It is amazing. And when you walk in, the first thing you're going to see is a big old mammoth. Well, the bones of it anyway. Actually, the woolly mammoth is outside, but that's another story. It is an incredible museum. The history, the chain of events that town has seen is astonishing. I think Saltville's history is even richer than Abingdon's. I'll be quite honest. I mean, you've got not dinosaurs, but the newer stuff. Then you've got the Native Americans that have come through. I have read several places that Native Americans, when food was hard to come by, when game was hard to come by, they would always come into that valley of Saltville because they knew they could always find game because the salt was on top of the ground. It was just a giant salt lick. And they could take as much game as they wanted. They would not settle there because they said it made their hunters lazy. And then when the white people moved in, zoom, that's the first place they went to. That was because it was those salt, don't ever call it a salt mine. People get a little irritated with you if you say salt mines, it's salt works. When they went to the salt works, that was the inland source of salt for pretty much, it ended up, especially during the Civil War, for the entire South. Do you know to this day they are still pumping salt out of Saltville? Yeah, it's a remarkable history. It really is. So I can't speak enough about it, but I'll leave it there. Thank you. There was somebody up over here.
My question is, how do you find this history, the obscure and the accurate? And you can't find all that on Google.
God, no. I do this silly thing. I read books. And seriously, that's where when I started this, I had just started teaching, and my research skills were still pretty good. And I would just simply go to local libraries. I know Washington County Library has got the Virginia Room, and they got some really good stuff. Emmert and Henry College has got some amazing stuff. And I would just go and find tidbits. And it was because of this tour. When I was a kid in Abingdon, I hated it. Oh, it's such a boring town. And I know most of you all said that about your towns too when you were younger. And it wasn't until I grew up and started realizing what a rich history we had, because I was getting these ghost stories. And I can't, like I said, I just can't go and say, okay, that's a haunted house. Next. That's not very exciting. So I started researching things. Also, we've got the Historical Society of Washington County. Oh, it's amazing. It is amazing. And it was just some things stick and some things don't. And that's how I started out with it. How I originally started this tour, a friend came up to me with a set of note cards. And he said, I gave this tour last year for the Historical Society. And he said, I was astonished at how many people showed up. He said, I'm never going to do this again. Do you think you can do something with this? And at that point, the heavens parted and the angels sang, ah! And here I am over 25 years later. So I started with that, and it's grown from there. I'm just nosy. That's a lot of it. Yes, sir. Stoneman's Raid. Yeah, it was pretty. Like I said, we really lucked out, because when they left Abingdon, they were heading north to go to Wythel to take over the lead mines. And then they dropped, and I don't know how they moved this fast. They got to Wythel, took over the lead mines, and then dropped back down and engaged in the Second Battle of Saltville. I don't. But I bet you could find it. It came through Kingsport. Yeah. Yeah, this was the part of the war that everybody had said, okay, we got to wrap this up. So, I mean, it had been a gentleman's war up to that point. And then after that, it's like, let's just burn them to the ground. Okay.
The North Fork of the Holston River.
I don't know. Check. I'm sure you could find it. By the way, did you know that, Saltville connection, Kingsport was called Kingsport because of William King, who actually owned a good portion of the salt works in Saltville. And that was where he would float the salt out of Saltville. And Kingsport was pretty much the first destination. Yeah. Had it going on.
Any other questions from the audience? Scotty, I've got someone. Did we get any Zoom questions? Okay.
Hey, since we're in Bristol, do you have any ghost stories about Bristol or any?
I don't. I used to, I will say this. I used to teach at VI College. And how many of you ever heard about Ghostly Vera?
Oh, yes.
That's
a scary one.
Vera was the one who set fire to the part of the campus when she hung herself and her foot kicked the candle over and set fire to her room. And she's still there. Something to think about.
I have a few friends who were students there who talk about seeing
Yeah.
her in the window and and seeing flames, what look like flames.
Yeah.
That's a very creepy story, actually.
Yeah. I used to, when I taught there, I would always try to get in at least once a semester and take some of my more adventurous students. Come on, you gotta go sit. No, extra credit. Okay. Yeah. It's a great room. But yeah, that Vera's about the only one that I know of in Bristol. Like I said, I wish there were more of me because Saltville needs a storyteller or two or three. It really does. Bristol definitely needs one. So I will put this out there to all of you all. Oh, Lord. I would be very happy to meet with anyone who is seriously interested and is a native or has been living in the town long enough to call themselves a native, who wants to learn to be a storyteller and tell the ghost stories of these two towns. I have wanted forever to train somebody or to at least get them inspired enough to do the digging and to find the stories and to be able to tell them. I don't want to cut. I don't want any, I don't want fame or glory from it. I just simply want those stories to be told, because if they're not told, they're going to die out. And I just don't want that to happen. Get her name and number.
Her family had owned part of a farm and donated part of their land for the Methodist church that's there. That dates back to the 1700s. We're part of the graveyard and some other things. So I have a connection for you.
Okay. Because I am willing to extend myself. I don't know how far I'll go into it, but if I can give anybody pointers or, tell you things or, give you inspiration or whatever, I would be happy to do so, because I don't want to see these stories disappear. That's my main point. So again, reach out to me if, find me on, find my website. You can also find me on Facebook. You can message me there. And DonnaMarie is all one name. And just reach out and say, hey, I want to do this. And then I'm going to call you crazy. And then we'll talk. Because this is, I love what I do. And it's not about me. It's about my stories. It's about our stories. And nothing is more exciting than when I have kids who come up and I hear them talk about, oh yeah, the tavern tart. I'm like, yeah. And these kids know these stories. Or I meet somebody who's 30 years old. I say, oh yeah, you came to my grade school and told stories. And they remember them. That's what's important. I'm a little too ADD. I put out a little tiny, I mean, I call it a book. It really wasn't, but I did something back in 2004. And basically I need to do another one because it's funny because I still have a couple of copies of that book and I went through and read it the other day. I'm like, I don't even recognize these stories because I don't tell them anymore. Everything has changed. The stories that I tell are stories that have been shared to me too. That's another place where I've gotten my information. When I first started my tour, I would do 3 tours a night and they were 50 minutes long. And we would start from the Martha Washington, go down to the tavern and zoom back to Barter. And like I said, do 3 a night. And then after every tour, somebody would come up to me and say, now I don't believe in ghosts, but, and I love that word, but, and then they would tell me these stories that would make my scalp go, ah! And I would incorporate their stories into what I was telling. So then my tour ended up being 3 hours long. I don't do that anymore. Even I can't talk that much, and I can talk. So, but it's important because, like I said, this isn't about me. It's about us. These are our stories that I'm just giving out for people to remember and to share. And also, one last thing I want to tell you guys is I tell folks at the end of the night at my tours, okay, you've heard my stories, and you're sitting there thinking to yourself, those aren't scary. Well, I've got news for you. Tonight, when you go home and go to bed, you're going to think about me.
So thank you so much, DonnaMarie. This has been a real pleasure. I think everyone has enjoyed it. Let's give her another hand, everyone.
Thank you all. Happy Halloween. Yay!
And do be sure and go check out her website and see where you can see her next. It sounds like it's coming up soon.
Yeah. We meet at Wolf Hills Coffees, and tours start every night unless it's pouring rain at 7:30. But do please, if you can, make a reservation. I do prefer that.
It sounds like fun.
Yeah. Thank you guys. Yay!
Before you all leave, I do want to just tell you about a few things that are coming up at the museum that you might be interested in for the future. For those of you who are musicians, we do 2 monthly community jams every month. And so this month we have our general community jam on Saturday, October 8th from 2 to 5 p.m. And then our bluegrass, I need my glasses on. Our bluegrass jam is on Saturday, October 22nd from 2 to 5 p.m. Those are free and open to the public. So anyone can come and play music and listen to music. And it's a really great place to make new friends and to just make music together. Our next speaker series for November is on November 8th, Tuesday, November 8th at 7 p.m. And we are it is only virtual this time because the person is not local, but you can sign up for that for free and go to Zoom and see a talk with Jason Honor, who is the archivist and museum manager for Martin Guitars. So we're going to learn a lot about Martin Guitars and their very, very rich history in country music. The other few things that we have going on, we have an exhibit right now about Johnny Cash at Folsom Prison. It is only here for about 2 more weeks. It closes on October 20th. So if you have not seen that, I would really recommend it. It's an awesome, awesome exhibit. And we will be screening on that evening at 6:30 p.m. Inside the Walls of Folsom Prison, which is the film that inspired Johnny Cash to write Folsom Prison Blues. It's a schlocky B movie set in a prison. So be prepared, but it is what inspired him to write that song. And then finally, 2 really fun events coming up at the end of this month and the beginning of the next. On Saturday, October 29th, we have a free community day all day long. We are free and open to the public, no admission cost to come in. And from 12 to 3, we do lots of fun family activities. Just perfect for the whole family, anyone who's both young and young at heart. So if you want to come back to the museum, that's a great day to do it. And then on November 4th, Friday, November 4th at 7 p.m., we have our free community square dance. We haven't done this for 2 years because of the pandemic. It has been hugely popular in the past. We have a caller, we have a live string band, and it's a lot of fun. So please join us from some of those other events. And thank you again.
Thank you, guys.